Hi, everyone. This is Calvin with rightthinking.com. Thanks for being here. It's August 11th, 2026. And today I'd like to talk to you about monarchy. It's an issue that people don't usually talk about, but here in Canada, where I am at least, it's something in the background and something that people should consider. And I'll just let you know right off the bat that I lean towards being a soft monarchist, not total ardent, right into everything they do, but I do see value of it, and so I am a soft supporter of it for sure. So I would like to tell you about those reasons why. Hopefully, you will consider what I have to say and maybe alter some of your viewpoints as well. So um, today, we're talking about who is the head of state for your country, and when you're talking about political situations, there's really only two alternatives. One is to be a monarchy of some sort, or else a republic. So if you're a monarchy, you have a monarch, an unelected person as your head of state, and if you're a republic, you have in some form someone at the head of state for your country who is elected by the people. Okay. And just to make some pretty obvious statements at the outset, there are good and bad monarchies, there are good and bad republics, right? So I don't think it's fair to say that one is by nature better or more democratic than the other by nature. We'll get into that in this video. But certainly there have been good and bad examples of both. I think for monarchy, a good example of a good monarch that I hardly hear anything bad said about is Queen Elizabeth, who just died a few years ago, Queen Elizabeth II. Almost everyone would regard her as universally a pretty good monarch. And then on the same token, there's bad monarchs, so there's many that we could choose from as well. I'm choosing to make note of Louis XIV of France. Um, he was, although that said, he was around for the biggest part of the French Empire in the colonial era. His nickname was the Sun King because the sun never set on the French Empire. But he made a statement when asked about politics, and his famous quotation is, "I am the state." So that doesn't bode very well for people who are looking for democratic empowerment through their government. So, okay, and same thing with presidents. So a good president, we could say, is probably maybe President Kennedy, who was shot. I don't hear very much bad said about him. It seems to be fairly universally admired by people. And then on the bad side, there's presidents who have been elected by the people but turn out to be really bad. Hugo Chavez of Venezuela is an example of that. So yeah, there's good and bad in both camps, and so I don't think that's really the comparison to use. Today I want to talk about a monarchy, and we'll go through pros and cons of both, five pros and cons, 5 pros and 5 cons for each, and I will sort of give commentary throughout about what I think of each of the points. And just to be clear, we're not talking about absolute monarchy. So there's absolute monarchy where the monarch has absolute control over everything in the state, every political decision, every appointment, things like that. Absolute control. We're not talking about that. That's more the medieval style. Um, with the absolute control. Britain started in 1215 to move away from that with the signing at Runnymede in 1215, Magna Carta. So that began a process that continued throughout the decades and the centuries, where Britain eventually evolved into constitutional monarchy that we have today, and it's a pretty good system, right? So, and that's what constitutional monarchy is. It's where you still have a monarch as your head of state for the country, but the powers of the monarch are not absolute. They are muted. They are balanced with powers of other forms of government within the country, such as parliament, the courts, and things like that. So it's all held in balance with each other. And ideally, they're supposed to work in sync with each other to produce the best outcomes for the people that they govern, right? That's constitutional monarchy, a monarch whose powers are limited and balanced within a constitutional framework. So that is the form of monarchy that I'm talking about today, the one that I will be listing uh, some pros for sure, and addressing concerns that people have. Okay. People may not know, but the monarch does do something. They're not just a figurehead, but they certainly here in Canada and for the most part in Britain too, they do similar things. So things that are important to our democracy. So, for example, one thing is they read the throne speech. If you're not from a Commonwealth country, you may not know, but at the opening of every parliament, the monarch or the monarch's representative is tasked with reading a speech that the governing party prepares. It's called the throne speech, and where it outlines generally what the government intends to do during that session of parliament. Now, some might say that it's not necessary. You could get someone else to do it. But yeah, you could, but why not have the monarch do it? It sort of shows sort of like the connection of the monarch to our democratic institutions, right? So, um, the monarch is the only one that has the constitutional power to dissolve parliament. So, here in Canada, at least by constitution, they must be held every 5 years. By tradition, they're every 4 years. So it's really the monarch that makes a decision on when to have that election. Now, it is on the advice of the prime minister usually, or in the provinces, the premier. But the monarch can refuse to accept that advice and make their own decision. But regardless, it's the monarch who has the power to get those wheels moving to dissolve parliament. And when you dissolve parliament, that creates an election cycle, and at the end of that election cycle, a new members of parliament are elected, and possibly a new government. So the monarch sort of recycles and refreshes our democracy every 4 or 5 years, right? So the monarch chooses a prime minister. So um, they can choose who they want. Obviously, the top candidate normally is the leader of the party that wins the most seats. But if there's a problem with that person or whatever, the person can be dismissed, and a new person chosen instead. They sign bills, so Parliament can debate whatever they want in the House of Commons, but it's not really official or enforceable by the courts or by the police until the monarch gives what's called royal assent, which involves signing the bill. And so that's sort of a protection that the monarch gives against the elected government. If we had a really poor government, let's say Hitler was head of the government or something, the monarch or the governor general could choose simply to not sign a bill, and then the bill would never become law and would never become enforceable. So that's an extreme example, of course, but nonetheless, it's one that fits, right? So the monarch gives awards to Canadians who have done special deeds, shown acts of bravery, or really excelled in their fields and stuff. I'm referring to the Order of Canada here, but they recognize the good things that come out of Canada and the citizens of Canada, and issue awards for those things. And also figuratively, the monarch is a international ambassador for all of Canada, represents Canada. The head of state is the monarch, right? So the king, or when he's not here, the 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 governor general, right? They can go through the world and are seen as a representative of our nation. And also, one final thing maybe is that they are also head of the military, so that's a safeguard against abuse of the elected government, right? We don't want the elected government to be head of state as well, because then you're combining all the powers into one figure. And so by retaining the powers of the military with the king or queen or their representative, that means that our elected government, when they want to uh, to participate in a military action, they have to get the agreement of the king or queen or their representative, right? And so there's a balancing of powers and things like that. So it just leads to sort of a more democratic way of doing things. Okay. So I just wanted to say a few of those things at the start in case you didn't know that the king or queen does a few things that are important to our democracy. And I could list more, but I'm not going to. I don't want to keep the video too long. So let's just jump into 5 reasons why I think that having the monarch is a good thing. Pros for having the monarchy in Canada. And again, I'm talking about constitutional monarchy, not absolute monarchy. So first of all, the most obvious thing is that the king or queen, they represent sort of our history, our tradition, our culture, right? I mean, we were planted here in North America as a colony, and but that means we have a connection going back to our mother country, Great Britain, and look at all the political traditions we inherited from them. I mean, Canada became a country in 1867, so we kind of copied however Great Britain looked at the time, and we replicated that here. And we have had some modernization of the institution since then, Parliament as well. And at the same time, while time was moving forward, Britain modernized as well. But we've got a pretty good system and it represents our tradition, our history, going all the way back to that Magna Carta, Runnymede in 1215. To think that we're connected to a a, a monarchy, a royal family that goes back that far and even further back then, goes back to a country that was initiating democratic rights on its people as far back as 1215. And what other European country was modernizing and being democratic like that? Not in 1215. They weren't. No, you have to go forward in history about 500 years before you see other Europeans starting to modernize and become democratic like that. But step by step, in little bits, the monarchy was doing those things, and we're connected to that. I mean, the story of the Usher of the Black Rod and how he's not allowed in the House of Commons, and he has to knock with his black cane on the door of Parliament, and he's always refused entry. I mean, those are cool things that they don't. I mean, technically do a lot, but they are representative of our way of doing things, and I just think that there's such a richness that comes from that tradition, and it goes back, for over a millennium, right? And we're lucky enough to be part of that. So, um, in a theoretical sense, the monarch is a neutral referee between competing factions of government, right? So Parliament has different parties that are elected to Parliament, and they're always debating back and forth with each other. There's obviously a governing party and then an official opposition, but then there's usually smaller other parties that are in opposition as well. So the monarch sort of is able to be that neutral referee before the competing uh, preferences of all the little parties, and so they sort of keep things in line and hopefully move the debate forward in a rational sense so that we get a good product at the end of the debates in the form of a completed bill, right? So all right, so it it does protect us from the excesses of the elected government. So I sort of alluded to some of those points earlier about being able to refuse to give royal assent to a bill if it's outlandish and extreme. They can just choose not to sign it. It doesn't happen very often here in Canada. It's never happened at the federal level. Provincially, though, it has happened a few times, and it did create a bit of a kerfluffle for sure. But I would argue in the end that that turned out to be a good thing, and it shows that there is dialogue and debate back and forth between the branches of government, which is a good thing. Choosing a prime minister as well, if you've got a real schmuck, then that person can be bypassed and a different person sworn in as the prime minister. It's totally on the decision of the monarch or the monarch's representative. Okay. Um, Another sort of theoretical one is that the monarch has long-term goals in mind for the nation. Because remember that the monarch is a person who is there for their life until they die, right? Queen Elizabeth was the longest serving British monarch, and obviously she was Queen of Canada that whole time as well. King Charles, we'll see, but anyhow, remember that governments that are elected, they're usually elected for just a 4-year period, and so the promises they make to the people are just sort of short-term solutions, and they're often kind of self-centered promises because they're made in the context of that party wanting to be reelected. But the monarch doesn't have to worry about that. They can think of long-term goals. They can think of goals that are not dependent on having to be reelected because the monarch is not ever elected or voted on, right? So you might think that's strange, but in a way, it's a good thing because when you have that person that's sort of stepped back from some of those things of politics, it ends up contributing to a better system, right? You combine the short term self-centered goals of the elected government with the long term unselfish goals of the monarch, and hopefully with them working together, in the end you come out with good solutions for your nation because of that, right? So that's one thing I would say. And also I would say that also theoretical is that the unelected neutral head of state better represents all citizens, right? Because if you have an elected president by the people, you could argue that that president really only represents the people that voted for the president and put him or her there, right? But the king or queen is not elected. They're never elected. They're there just natural by succession act, and they will be there until they die, right? So um, they don't have to worry about being elected. So any decisions they make, they don't have to worry about how that may impact their electability because they're not elected. And also, they don't have to worry about whether this will please a certain faction of parliament or whatever, because they're not affiliated with any political party at all. They can just make decisions that are best for the country, and whether or not a party likes it or not doesn't matter, right? So that's a good thing in that it leads to them being able to make decisions that maybe people don't see clearly, and which in the end make for the state to be better. Okay. So those are some of the cons, and I would say that there are some cons too. I'll give you some of the ones that are most commonly given. I don't find a lot of validity to some of them, and I will tell you why. But let's just get started with them, and I've got 5 of them as well. So the first one is people say is that keeping the queen or king in Canada costs too much. Why put that burden on the Canadian taxpayer? We could be rid of the monarchy, and then we would save Canadians money, right? Of course, the argument against that is that if you don't have a monarch, you still have to have a head of state. So if you're going to have a president or something like that, emperor, whatever, uh, don't you still have to have a budget for that person, right? Their salary, uh, security, protection, a place to live, and all those sorts of things. So I don't really think that you're going to save a lot of money whether you have a president or a monarch. It doesn't matter. You're still going to be spending money. And I will add too that the monarchy doesn't cost us very much. If you go on the website for the Canadian Monarchist Society, you'll see they do reports every 2 years about what the actual cost is, and it's not very much. And I would also argue that the monarch brings in money too, right? When the king or queen visits Canada, people spend money to come out and see the monarch. They buy the plates and the teacups and things like that. And so that generates revenue and puts money into our system, right? So, okay. Second thing people say is the monarch doesn't do much. They're just a figurehead. They don't do much. I actually think there's some validity on this, but not complete. About 5 minutes ago, I just went over with you several things that the monarch does do. So obviously, they do some things, but the common is that they don't really do much. There is a debate in Canada whether the monarch should do more than. Well, there's a perception that they just rubber stamp whatever the government says. There might be some validity to that. I don't really know for sure, but I can tell you that for people that say that, if you do get the government involved, then some people might say that they're stepping outside of their boundaries, that they're not supposed to be involved in day to day politics, and get back in your lane and don't do things like that, right? A lot of people had worry about King Charles when he became king because of his previous uh, help to environmental causes and things like that. If he would bring that to the institution as king, and so far I've seen a little bit of it, but not too much yet. So I don't really think that there's much to say about that, right? Because if you want more, then you're going to get things like that you don't like, and then you'll be asking to go back to the system the way it was, right? So whatever. I don't think it's that great of an argument. So um, third one is people will just say that by nature the monarchy is an undemocratic institution, because they will say, why is it that out of millions of possibilities that one egg and one sperm happen to unite, and then the person that grows out of that zygote becomes a monarch one day with all these privileges and powers, and they didn't do anything to deserve it other than being elected by chance into the right family? And how is that democratic in the 21st century? I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. All I know is that this is a system that works pretty good, and that's the way it's always been. And the alternatives are not going to be much better. So I'm okay with having a pass on this one. So okay. Fourth one is that people will say that the monarch is a foreigner to Canada. Okay, they'll say, look at the king when he talks. He's got an accent. You can tell he's not Canadian. He hardly has never really lived in Canada. He lives in Great Britain most of the time. And how can you say that he is head of our state when he's not even a Canadian, right? That one I don't really have a lot of validity to. I don't see validity to. I liken our relationship to Great Britain to a family, right? So we're one of the children of Great Britain. So is Australia, New Zealand, America, South Africa, a bunch of places, right? You came from a family, right? Are you your own person? I'm sure you would say yes, you are. But do you have similarity to your mom? Yep. To your dad? Yep. How about to your brother, your sister, your cousins? Do you have similarity to them? Yes, you do. But you also have your own unique characteristics too. So, but would you say that you're foreign to your mother? Are you foreign to your brother? You probably wouldn't say that. So that's why I'm saying that that argument isn't really good. I mean, technically, yeah, maybe not Canadian, but I think it's a stretch to say that they're foreign. Okay. The final objection people say is that the monarchy continues to be a source of division between French Canada and English Canada, because having a monarch reminds the French that they were defeated one day in the past at the Plains of Abraham, and ha ha ha, we're the winners. That's why there's English everywhere, and it sucks to be you, right? First of all, English people, speaking people, don't really say that, but I'm not convinced, though, that the issues with Quebec identity and Quebec independence aspirations, I don't think they would be so easily solved just by getting rid of the monarch. There's deeper issues than just that. And knowing a little bit about history, I would say that a lot of their problems have been more with the federal government rather than the monarch that lives in London. So, okay. All right. So that's what I have for you. 5 pros and 5 cons about the monarchy. I recognize that maybe this won't be enough for some people to convince you because of the history of your population. So, for example, I know it's very hard for Irish people to accept some of these viewpoints, and I understand why. Although there are Royal Irish out there, I understand the French are because of their history. They're very committed to their republic, even though they have a long history of monarchy as well. Sometimes, no matter how good your argument is, you just can't convince people. And so I don't try. I've done my best. I've given some pretty good arguments here for you to consider. So I'd like you to think about them and then let me know what you think about them. Write them in the comments, please. Let me know if you agree with me and why, and if you don't agree with me, tell me why you don't agree. I'm quite open to having a dialogue. So I appreciate you coming out here, and hope you have a good rest of your day. And we'll see you next time. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.